Yeah, you're back to Global Business Reporting. We're live at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. There is in the continent, thousands of delegates are meeting from around the world, business leaders, political leaders, as well as social activists, including the media, covering some of the biggest story around the world, from technology to economy to energy, climate change, inequality, and everything in between. We've got two of our correspondents at this time, Rolake Akikugbe-Filani and Rotu Sudire, the anchor of the show I'm sitting on in this morning. Reaction to the Vice President's speech. Rolake, let me start with you on Mr. President, Nigeria's Vice President, Senator Kashim Shettima.
Yes, he basically spoke on the panel titled An African Economy of Scale with Wamkele Mene, the Executive Secretary of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. And his submission was basically centered around the need to mechanize agriculture, given the potential market of the AfTA. But I want to give you three main things that are critical for that to happen, frankly. The first is investment in infrastructure across the continent. It's not enough to want to hope for greater intra-Africa trade, including the trade in soft commodities or agricultural produce, but we need to invest in transport infrastructure, port infrastructure, and that has to be digitally enabled. The second thing that will enable us to scale regional exports and intra-Africa trade is obviously going to be finance, and it has to be finance that is quick, agile, and nimble, not just directed at large-scale projects, but also small and medium-sized enterprises who are trying to trade across the board. And the third part of it is the domestic policy support that can then collaborate with the Africa Free Trade Area Initiative to really boost inter-regional trade. So yes, agriculture, all well and good. We like to hear it because after all, in Nigeria, it is a sector that employs most of, has the biggest employment levels where most people are employed. So it's absolutely critical. But in order to scale agriculture, not just domestically, but across the region, we need to tackle those infrastructure bottlenecks that impact the supply chain, as well as the funding bottlenecks that also impact our ability to scale our exports across the region. And the same would go for many other African countries also.
Yes, thank you, Rolake. Let me throw this to you, Rotus, regarding what you talk about. The theme for this year's World Economic Forum is about trust, rebuilding trust in institutions, in politicians, in politics itself, in democracy, and institutions that govern economies around the world, policies and politics, as it were. What do you make of this? Do you think this is the time to ask big questions and demand for this trust reconstruction for Africa and across the continent?
Yeah, Boston, if you look at what's been happening with our leadership right now, trust is a big issue. I mean, look at the scandal with the humanitarian ministry. And in fact, the president suspending all the channels of funds that are supposed to be going to the folks that need assistance. So it's a very bang-on theme with respect to trust in institutions, trust in our business leadership, and trust across the board. So it's it's a theme that makes a lot of sense.
Well, so the World Bank's Global Economics Prospect Report, which was released, the WEF did a survey of economies. 65% of them believed that the global economy is still going to remain weak this year. Kristalina Georgieva, the IMF managing director, was optimistic that we could see some tailwind from 2023 to push us forward in 2024. Rolake, what do you make of what are the biggest headwinds that you think could impact the sub-Saharan African economy for the current year? We're just getting started.
Yeah. Great question. In the top risks that were identified, socioeconomic polarization was one of the top risks. But for sub-Saharan Africa, it's really achieving that monetary and fiscal stability across economies. Many countries have huge debt burdens. They have to restructure their debt. Talk about Ghana, talk about Zambia, even Nigeria. It's really how we can continue to service our obligations and pursue sustainable economic development policies. So for me, monetary stability will be key. We're not sure whether we've adequately tackled inflation globally. And so long as Africa and African countries are still dependent on food imports and energy imports into their countries, they will be vulnerable to those external shocks around rising commodity prices. And that's a risk, a driver for inflation. So what we need to do is focus focus on investment in long-term infrastructure to lessen the supply side issues domestically at home in order to kind of build resilience around some of these global economic headwinds. And of course, the other major thing to look out for is the environment and climate. We can't get away from that issue. That continues to play a role, but we have a huge opportunity to leverage innovative sources of funding to help achieve some of our own domestic economic goals.
Interesting. All right, thank you, Rolake Akikugbe and Rotu Sudiri. We'll be back with you folks in just a few minutes. This is your global business, new business report here on Arise. This is all Davos, the biggest economic meeting right now in the world, from politics to policies and everything else in between. This is Arise News.